Welcome back. The government has set a price range of $2.35 to $2.80 per share for the part privatisation of Mighty River Power. New Zealand investors will also receive a loyalty bonus if they retain their shares, something National hinted at on this program a year ago. The offer document also outlines the risks for investors, and the closure of the Tiwai Point smelter is, of course, one of those risks. If the smelter shuts down, it would also have an enormous impact on our electricity market. And the man who can tell us much more about this is Transpower Chief Executive Patrick Strange. Hi Patrick, thanks for coming in this morning. If Tiwai Point does close, would our electricity system as it stands at the moment cope?
Yes, perfectly well. We can go into some detail. We've got a little bit of work to do to get the power out of Southland, but basically we're in very good shape. There's a sort of view that Manapouri just supplies Tiwai, the smelter. It's not actually true any longer. It might have been true 40 years ago. But even today, we're pumping 600 megawatts south into the lower South Island to keep the lights on, and having quite a struggle because the rain in Fiordland is not happening. So we have to export power from actually the North Island and the Waitaki Valley into Southland. It's an integrated system.
So if Tiwai Point is decommissioned, because much has been made of this, what becomes of Manapouri in terms of hooking it up with the national grid? Or
well, it is very strongly hooked up already. And if you think of the transmission system, trying to simplify it in sort of three parts. There's the North Island, where we have to get, our biggest problem is getting stuff from Taupo north. And we built the new 400 kV capable line and commissioned it a year ago. And we're just completing a second line. So we're fine there. The DC link, which takes stuff from the Waitaki Valley to north of Wellington, we've just spent 600 million on, and we'll commission that in 30 days, so we can get anything we like out of the South Island. The only small constraint is between the Waitaki Valley and what we call the lower South Island, which is Roxburgh in south. So we've got the Clutha, Manapouri, etc. We can push about 600 megawatts south or north on that now. If something happened at Tiwai and it disappeared tomorrow, we had a huge fire, we'd spill a little bit of water for a couple of years, but in reality it's not going to shut quickly. We've got a project approved on the books which will enhance that link in the lower South Island, which will mean Manapouri's just part of the national grid. So we don't see any issues with Tiwai closing.
So that's interesting, because much has been made about whether or not you could get that power up to the North Island, where we've always thought that it would be needed and you'd need a fourth Cook Strait cable. You're saying that's not the case?
The Cook Strait cable, after we've completed the work this year, will be capable of 1,200 megawatts north and south. And part of the reason that the enhancement occurred was because we all know Tiwai will go someday. And we're quite public about that. The work we're doing in the lower South Island at the moment, and it's approved, one of the scenarios was Tiwai would leave in 2022. That's all public information, this is not news.
So if Tiwai goes, you don't need, or do you need, any further investment from the government in order to make use of Manapouri?
We don't get investment from the government, we borrow and do it. We'd accelerate one project, which is about 110 million. It's already approved. We put it on hold, actually. That sounds like a lot of money. For us, we spend 300 million in a low capital year. And that would take about probably 3 summers, because we don't want to upset the system as we do it. It's just tweaking lines, really.
OK, one of the big political issues, of course, though, is if Tiwai should close, what would happen to power prices? What do you make of that? Would power prices go down?
Yeah. As my ex-chairman said, you have to be very careful about forecasting, particularly about the future. It's a market, so we never quite know what will happen. Certainly some of our older thermal plants would close earlier. They're going to close anyway at some point. That's sort of the coal plants and the gas plants in the top of the North Island. Meridian would have 600 megawatts of pretty low-cost power, which she would want to put on the market. It'll have a downward effect for a few years on wholesale prices, which will be a relief to some struggling businesses. How big that is, I mean, you'd be a brave man to forecast.
So prices will go down. That would be the reality. It's just basic
wholesale
supply and demand.
spot prices will certainly, it'll be a downward factor on them for a few years. Depends how quickly those older plants shut down. We had a very...
And what plants are you talking about? Are you talking about
Huntley?
Or?
Yeah, well, Huntley coal plant, one of them is mothballed. There's still 750 megawatts there. A very valuable sort of what we call firming plants when we get big droughts in the South Island. But it's an old plant, very well run by Genesis, but you know, it won't be there forever. We've got 2 combined cycle gas plants, each of 400 megawatts in the North Island. They are sort of in the latter half of their life. We can hark back to the 2000s when we had a surplus of generation, early 2000s, with some of those plants actually being built. And we saw New Plymouth, 600 megawatts close, Otahu close. So this is the cycle that goes on.
Does this also mean we could see a hold put on some of the planned thermal and hydro plants as well?
Well, we already have a slight surplus because load growth is very slow at the moment. And we've had quite a lot of new plant in the last couple of years, geothermal particularly, and some gas peakers. I'd be surprised if we saw much new plant in the next 4 or 5 years. We don't need it. And people are rational in the end. There's no point in sort of growing more carrots when there's a glut.
All right, we have to leave it there. Patrick Strange, CEO of Transpower, appreciate your time this morning.